Hi, everyone. We are Giant Combat. This is our team, and here are our project instructors. Now, Giant Combat is a student pitch project exploring how melee combat in virtual reality against a large-scale enemy can feel comfortable, satisfying, and cool. We're going to be using this term LSC to refer to the large rock giant you'll see later on in the presentation. And we went into this project with specific goals in mind. The first is just a general exploration of the space of combat against an enemy in VR. The second would be to produce a high-fidelity prototype or prototypes using Valve Index hardware as well as the Unreal Engine. And the third would be to publish our results online in the form of a white paper or Gamma Sutra article so other VR developers can learn from our experience. And there were a lot of lessons we learned early on, even before quarters. For instance, in the image behind me, that is one of our early level designs, and there was a climbing route that zigzagged over a rock staircase. We realized this wasn't the optimal strategy for what we were doing, because when the player was actually climbing through this route and looking down, they would see the previous stair, basically, which would impede their view. Moving forward, we tried to implement a rule of strict verticality to really amplify that sense of not only how high you are, but also how far you've progressed as you ascended. Another lesson we learned was about the metrics of the LSC in general. In our initial pitch, we stated that 20 meters would be an appropriate height. However, through a little bit of testing, we realized that 60 meters is definitely a better number. We came to this number because the LSC still has that daunting and imposing presence, but he's not so big that you feel like your actions will have no consequence on him. To put it in more concrete terms, our LSC is roughly 2/3 the height of the Statue of Liberty. And finally, we learned just how important feedback was in an experience like this. Even something as simple as adding a confirmation sound effect for grabbing a surface just really brought the experience alive. It made it that much more tactile, and real to the player. To talk a little bit more about quarters, here's Zahang.
All right, thanks, Florence. Now, I'm going to talk about our quarter reviews and feedbacks. Actually, during quarters, we receive a lot of precious feedback from faculties, and we summarize them, come up with these 3 major points. The first one is building levels, more focusing on the LSC, and second one is the loom response when the player is actually facing the LSC, and third one is our weekly sprints by questions. So talking about level design, here's our original level. This one we focusing on building surrounding the tutorial part, and it's very long and very hard. And during courses, we realized this is something that we don't want to do. So we refined the level to be like this. We changed our design goal from building a good tutorial to how to focusing on compositions and building the environment surrounding the LC. As you can see right here, we shortened the tutorial level a lot, but this one also has some design flaws. For example, the players feel confusing when they high up on the monkey bars, and they also have high chance to get stuck if they fall down the cliffs. So we finally land on our level like this. We shortened the tutorial part even more, and we keep the same composition. For example, we have vertical lines back in the background, which will draw players' attention towards the center. And we have the contrast lighting between the tutorial and the center part to make the players more focusing in the center as well. And we also have consistent visual cues. For example, we have all the white blocks are climbable, and all the green spheres are hookshot points. To talk more about loom response here, we learned a lot of before quarters. We find out loom response is a good way to amplify the sense of scale. So as you can see here in the video, the LSC assembling together and standing up, which is a good moment which pushing the power of daunting and gigantic of the LSC. Now it's Jiajun talking about our weekly sprints.
Yeah, thanks, Zahang. Another big shift made after quarter is we start doing weekly sprints via question, so as to focus on specific problem in this field. Our first question is, how do people feel traversing the LEC, which we think could be the perfect first one with not only providing some first ever player experiences, but also provide some early lessons for the team to iterate our design. We explored this question during week 5 with setting towards questions like having a straightforward gameplay goal, making the entire LEC climbable with basic movements, and reducing the difficulty of control by setting high tolerance for climbing and hook shots, which are basic movements for now. With this, we hosted our first playtest session later that week with 12 ETC students going through our experience. We were all happy to see their enthusiasm and receive a lot of useful feedbacks. From the data we collected, the fairy movement concentrated on stabbing the eye and climbing, while players feel frustrated about hookshot and would want more feedbacks for actions. Overall, the first demo conveys a good sense of skill, and surprisingly, the motion sickness problem is ignorable. Related to the question, the climbing feature seems to work well. However, the difficulty of this is still too high as players feel disoriented while interacting with the LSE. The frustration moment for the hookshot mainly came from keep failing to picking up the hook, and we do observe some collision issue as players keep clipping into the LSE, and even with some audio feedback, it's still difficult to ensure the hand is touching the surface while climbing. Responding to the feedback, we made several changes during week 6. Now, the climb rules is implemented using a white box, just to give the indication where to go, and in this way to deal with the disorientation problem. Hooks are attached to the hands now, compared to be holstered on the wrist and need to be grabbed before, to lessen the learning curve for a Valve Index controller. And we prevented hand from going through surfaces to make climb easier. With the newly made changes, we hosted another playtest session with 8 high school students joining the session to address whether we successfully made the changes for our first playtest problems. As you can see in the chart, given that the playtesters doesn't have a lot of VR experience before, they endorse the sense of skill even more, but also feel disoriented in the world. But we do see some positive side, like the difficulty problem do get reduced a lot, and players enjoy the traversing process without feeling it to be difficult after getting familiar with the control. At this moment, we decided to move on to our next page, and now it's Simon talking about it.
Thanks, Jiajun. So in order to push forward our current experience and also respond to the feedback that the LSE not being very active, our next question will be, what are the correct behavior for the LSE reacting to the players? With this question, we brainstorm about some proper actions, and we implement 2 major reactions. So the first one is right after the LSE forming up, it will roll at players, and there will be rock spikes coming out from the ground with hookshot point on it, so that player can hook onto it and approach to the LSE without using any fake walk. The other one is that we add vision to the LSE, so when it sees you, it will launch a boulder. There are also some minor changes that we made onto the current one, is that we move the LSE a little bit back so that it will patrol around better in the area, and we also add more hookshot point onto the LSE for a player to better traversing through the LSE. So with this, at the end of week 7, we host our 3rd playtest, and 9 EDC students joined this session. So for this test, we also asked the players question about how they feel about the LSE's reaction. We know that the behavior of the LSE is an essential part for our entire experience, and there are still much more to add on to current one, but the data shows that we're currently on a relatively positive position. The other changes that can be shown on this chart is that the feeling of scales drop a little bit because of the distance from player to the LSE. And the difficulty is also dropped because of the hookshot point that we add. In order to utilizing and visualizing better of the playtest data, we developed a tool. And here's Ron talks in more detail about this.
Thank you, Simon. So another feature that we implemented was a way to save playtest data. So the way this works is that whenever somebody plays a game, every action that they take, every movement that they do gets saved into a file. And we can then use this file to recreate the entire experience in a third-person view and play it like a movie. So the video that you see behind me is actually a recreated third-person view of one of the playtesters who played our game. And this helps us identify the most popular paths amongst different players. And it also helps us identify spots where the players can potentially get stuck. With this, we can also generate heat maps. So the way the heat maps works is that we have an aggregated visualization of every player that has played our game. So we take all the files that we have collected and then use the heat map tool on that, and it generates a heat map like this. The video that you see behind me. And this helps us identify player trends and potential anomalies. Talking about future plans, we definitely plan to utilize the heat maps and the player data more to generate more insights into how we can improve our prototypes. We also definitely plan on continuing with the sprints via questions approach because we think that this is a directed way to learn something new every week. Also, talking about the future prototypes, we have a couple of ideas in mind. The first one is a glass prototype. This is because right now we have seen that people are not getting motion sick during our experience. And our theory is that this is because they don't see the horizon. So we want to test this out and see that if there's a glass LSE where they see the horizon, will that cause motion sickness? The other one is just having climbing because we think that climbing is a feature that we want to explore in the future. And now we will have a live demo. So we have got our own speedrunner. So the pile of rocks that you see in the front is the LSE, and these are swords that our player has to slay the LSE. The place that he landed right now is the trigger point for the assembling moment of the boss, and this is the loom response that Zahang was talking about. And these are the spikes, so the LSE detects your presence and roars and does the spike attack that you need to dodge, like Simon mentioned. Here's a boulder that comes towards you that Jajun very skillfully dodged. So what he's doing right now is making his way to the giant without coming inside the red light, because if you are inside the red light, the boss can see you. So on the boss, you can see that these white blocks are grabbable. You can climb on those. And the green spheres are hookable. And the idea here is to go to the top and slay the eye that is emitting the red light. And that is how you will slay the giant. Skillful maneuver. So he's almost at the shoulder height now, and this is when the LSE realizes that there's somebody on his shoulder, and he's not happy about that, so he's going to roar. It's a dramatic moment. But our champion is not discouraged and will go on. So he's making his way on the head now, and momentarily he'll pull out a sword. There's the eye, and he stabbed it. And now he's just casually falling down to see the beautiful death animation that will play. And yeah, that's a live demo. Thank you, Jaju. So in summary, we are Giant Combat, and our goal is exploration of melee combat with a large-scale enemy in virtual reality. Thank you, and we are now open for questions. Dave.
I guess if you were to write the article today, what advice would you put in it about designing and building for this?
So the question was that if we were to write the article that we are going to write in the future today, what advice would be put in that? Anybody wants to take that? Okay.
So I think a lot of the amplification we learned about our early lessons comes into play, especially when it comes to loom response, sense of scale, and not only making those powerful, but really making sure they're amplified in VR, especially when it comes to that early thing of like the climbing route with something obstructing your view from the ground, and just really being able to feel that sense of height. There are a bunch of little things we've seen in other VR games that have obscured a giant's height, like from the waist down. And then it's eventually revealed that it's bigger. We tried to do something a little bit similar with our assembly moment, just building upwards rather than revealing.
Jesse?
You came to the conclusion that 60 meters seemed to be the optimal height for a giant enemy. Can you explain why? What is it about 60 meters that feels right?
So the question is that we came to the conclusion that 60 meters is an appropriate height for the giant, and why is the 60 meters an appropriate height? Does anybody want to take that?
So like we do some very early tested with like different scale of the bosses, like we mentioned in our slide. Like there's like we tested with 20 meters, 30 meters, and 60 meters, and 100 meters. Because in our initial pitch, we set it to be 20 meters because that's how Shadow of Colossus and related games do with their scale. When we test it in VR, it feels like it's not that daunting enough. It doesn't feel powerful enough. So we decided to make it bigger, but we're also trying to make it not too big, so you still feel like you still have a way to take this giant down without like feeling this is completely scary or like overpowered to you. Yeah, that's why we settled down on 60 meters.
So I love the rock formation, but what would it be like to create a more organic giant fight? And what kind of problems would ensue?
The question is that while the rock formation is appreciated, what would it be like to have a more organic giant? Anybody wants to take that?
I'll take this. Actually, the rock formation also come from one of our decisions to make the art pipeline because this is like a very big giant, and we are kind of in a fast prototyping stage, so we want to build the giant very quickly. So we decided to go with the way to put each individual rocks onto the like a humanoid skeletal, so that it's easier to iterate on each different part on the body and also easier to make animation based on humanoid. So that's why we make the whole giant looks like each individual rocks separate from each other. And with that in mind, that's how we come to this moment, like the assembling moment the giant initially have, and this created Luma response. But like, respond to your question, like how to, what is to make a more organic feeling of the giant? We haven't think about this for now because I guess first reason is like that could be some further question we have if we have a longer time to build on our model to be more organic. Also, I guess it's not our current focus, but like, if we have time, we'll definitely look into this problem later. Yeah.
All right, that's time. Thanks, team.
Thank you.